The January 6th committee's fifth hearing was all about the Justice Department. More specifically, about how Trump tried to use the Justice Department to throw out the 2020 election results to keep him in the White House for his second term. Who were the witnesses? Former Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, former Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donaghue, and Steven Engel, Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel. A long way of saying he's the lawyer for the Attorney General. These three men all testified and talked about rejecting Trump's requests to investigate baseless claims of voter fraud in the run-up to January 6th. Antes de empezar, if you want to catch up on my summaries for the other hearings, check out this playlist right here. Now, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell so you get notified every time I upload a new January 6th committee summary or other videos covering US politics in a way that's less overwhelming and breaks down what is going on. Let's get back to the hearing. Here's Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger in his opening statement.
The president and his allies became keenly aware that with legal challenges exhausted and electoral votes certified, their only hope would be a last-ditch scheme to prevent Congress from certifying the win, thus throwing the entire system into constitutional chaos. The president wanted the department to sow doubt in the legitimacy of the election, to empower his followers and members of Congress to take action. If the department could just lend its credibility to the conspiracies, people would have the justification they needed to spread the big lie. So President Trump ultimately wanted the Department of Justice to say the election was, quote, corrupt and, quote, leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen. As you will hear today, the department's top leadership refused.
Former Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen testified and said that Trump called him virtually every day after he became Acting Attorney General in December of 2020 and asked him to help him overthrow the election. But the election wasn't corrupt and Rosen wouldn't do what Trump wanted. Trump repeatedly pressured then Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and his deputy Richard Donaghue to say that the 2020 election had been fraudulent. They investigated Trump's accusations, but there was no evidence to support them.
So one that was very clear at that point was the Antrim County, the ASOG report that I mentioned earlier. The Allied Security Operations Group released this report that's at 68% error rate. There was, in fact, in Antrim County, a hand recount. Had nothing to do with the department. The department did not request that. That was pursuant to litigation brought by other parties, but there was a hand recount. So they were able to compare the hand recount to what the machines had reported. And for the ballots that were actually counted by the machine, more than 15,000, there was one error, one ballot. And I did a quick calculation and came up with 0.0063% error rate, which is well within tolerance. And so I made it very clear to the president, because he was so fixated on the ASOG report in the December 15th conversation, that, in fact, our investigation revealed that the error rate was 0.0063%. So that, Mr. President, is an example of what people are telling you that is not true and that you cannot and should not be relying on. So that was one very explicit one, and I think you see that reflected in my notes. We went through a series of others. The truck driver who claimed to have moved an entire tractor-trailer of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania, that was also incorrect. We did an investigation where the FBI interviewed witnesses at the front end and the back end of that trailer's transit from New York to Pennsylvania. We looked at loading manifests. We interviewed witnesses, including, of course, the driver, and we knew it wasn't true. Whether the driver believed it or not was never clear to me, but it was just not true. So that was another one that I tried to educate the president on. There were a series of others, mostly in swing states. Of course, he wanted to talk a great deal about Georgia, the State Farm Arena video, which he believed, for various reasons, was, as he said it, fraud staring you right in the face.
Were any of the allegations he brought up found credible? Did you find any of them credible?
No.
Trump had started to pressure Department of Justice officials in public statements since November 2020. He went on TV on November 29, 2020, and said that the Department of Justice was missing in action and their leaders were refusing to do their job. Members of Congress that knew the allegations were false amplified Trump's claims. Their names won't surprise you because they're the usual Trump loyalists. Loie Gohmert from Texas, Andy Biggs from Arizona, Paul Gosar from Arizona, Matt Gaetz from Florida, Jim Jordan from Ohio, and Mo Brooks from Alabama. Some of these names are going to come up later in the summary, so stay tuned. Ya van a ver.
Ignoring the top law enforcement officer in the country, Republican congressmen amplified the stolen election message to the American public. Let's listen.
And so there's widespread evidence of fraud because people haven't done their jobs. Durham and Barr will deserve a big notation in history when it's written of the rise and fall of the United States if they don't clean up this mess, clean up the fraud, do your jobs, and save this little experiment in self-government.
Again, I join my colleagues in calling on Attorney General Barr to immediately let us know what he's doing.
We're already working on challenging the certified electors. And now what about the courts? How pathetic are the courts?
January 6th, I'm joining with the fighters in the Congress, and we are going to object to electors from states that didn't run clean elections. Democracy is left undefended if we accept the result of a stolen election without fighting with every bit of vigor we can muster.
The ultimate date of significance is January 6th. This is how the process works. The ultimate arbiter here, the ultimate check and balance is the United States Congress. And when something is done in an unconstitutional fashion, which happened in several of these states, we have a duty to step forward and have this debate and have this vote on the 6th of January.
Today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass.
This committee has already established that there was no evidence that the election had been stolen from Trump. Even after several recounts, investigations, and lawsuits, nothing changed. Biden won the election in 2020. He got over 7 million more votes than Trump in the popular vote, and he got 306 electoral college votes. Trump lost. He knew he lost, but he continued to promote crazy ideas to try to stay in power, even if by force. So let's take a look at how these events happened with a little timeline. December 21st, 2020. Several members of Congress, members of the far-right so-called Freedom Caucus, met with Trump. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia was also there. She was only Congresswoman-elect at the time because she hadn't been sworn in. Representative Scott Perry from Pennsylvania was there, and I'll tell you why he's important in just a minute. Mark Meadows, the White House Chief of Staff, tweeted that day that they had met to fight back against voter fraud. December 22nd, 2020. The day after this meeting and this tweet, Representative Scott Perry went back to the White House and brought over an environmental lawyer from the Department of Justice. This guy's name is Jeffrey Clark. And yes, we have two Jeffreys in this story. Jeffrey Clark is the environmental lawyer, and Jeffrey Rosen is the acting attorney general. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, Trump is talking to acting attorney general Jeffrey Rosen and mentions this other guy, Jeffrey Clark. December 26th, Jeffrey Rosen asked Jeffrey Clark why the president knows him. Clark admits that he met the president when Representative Scott Perry from Pennsylvania took him to the White House. Now, it's important to note that this is not a common thing. There are very strict guidelines to keep the White House and the Department of Justice as two separate entities. Clark promised acting attorney general Jeffrey Rosen that it wouldn't happen again. But listen to what was happening at the same time. Representative Scott Perry was pushing Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to put Jeffrey Clark as the new acting attorney general instead of Jeffrey Rosen. President Trump told Representative Perry to call the deputy attorney general, Richard Donaghue, and pressure him so he would push for Clark to be the new head of the Department of Justice because he would get in there and do some stuff. December 27th, Trump called both Rosen and Donaghue, so the acting attorney general and his deputy, to pressure them to help him overturn the election. Richard Donaghue took notes. Donaghue told Trump that the Department of Justice can't and won't snap its fingers and change the outcome of the election. Trump replied and said the following: "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Perdón? December 28th, Jeffrey Clark emails Rosen and Donaghue. He sends them a letter alleging that the Department of Justice had significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states. The letter urged state legislatures to consider objections to the certified ballots and decide between any competing slates of elector certificates. Remember, all of this is absolutely false. The plan was to make people believe that the Department of Justice had found something and justify eliminating the ballots for Biden or delay the January 6th certification in some other way. Jeffrey Clark, the environmental guy, wrote the letter on official letterhead from the Department of Justice. Oh, and he was so nice that he put little lines at the bottom for Rosen and Donaghue to sign. Both of them rejected this.
A key focus of our hearing today will be a draft letter that our witnesses here today refused to sign. This letter was written by Mr. Jeff Clark with another Department of Justice lawyer, Ken Klukowski, and the letter was to be sent to the leadership of the Georgia State Legislature. Other versions of the letter were intended for other states. Neither Mr. Clark nor Mr. Klukowski had any evidence of widespread election fraud, but they were quite aware of what Mr. Trump wanted the department to do. Jeff Clark met privately with President Trump and others in the White House and agreed to assist the president without telling the senior leadership of the department who oversaw him. As you will see, this letter claims that the U.S. Department of Justice's investigations have, quote, identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. In fact, Donald Trump knew this was a lie. The Department of Justice had already informed the President of the United States repeatedly that its investigations had found no fraud sufficient to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The letter also said this, quote, in light of these developments, the department recommends that the Georgia General Assembly should convene in special session, end quote, and consider approving a new slate of electors. And it indicates that a separate, quote, fake slate of electors supporting Donald Trump has already been transmitted to Washington, D.C. For those of you who have been watching these hearings, the language of this draft Justice Department letter will sound very familiar. The text is similar to what we have seen from John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani, both of whom were coordinating with President Trump to overturn the 2020 election. When one of our witnesses today, Mr. Donaghue, first saw this draft letter, he wrote this, quote, this would be a grave step for the department to take, and it could have tremendous constitutional, political, and social ramifications for the country, end quote. This committee agrees. Had this letter been released on official Department of Justice letterhead, it would have falsely informed all Americans, including those who might be inclined to come to Washington on January 6th, that President Trump's election fraud allegations were likely very real.
But Jeffrey Clark kept going. He started to call witnesses and start his own investigation. He was working with a guy by the name of Ken Klukowski, a guy that had just arrived at the Justice Department on December 15th, 2020. Who was that guy Ken working with? None other than John Eastman, the mastermind behind the scheme to have Pence not count the votes for Biden on January 6th or send the election back to the states. I went into more detail about John Eastman's plan in my summary of the third hearing that you can watch right here. December 31st, New Year's Eve, Trump asked the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to seize voting machines because, according to him and the lies he'd been fed, the machines had shifted votes. Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen said that the Department of Justice had investigated and the machines were fine. Trump wasn't happy with the response, so he threatened to get rid of Rosen and Donaghue and put Jeffrey Clark, the environmental lawyer, in charge of the Justice Department. Why? Because then things would get done. Now, during this January 6th hearing, these men testified that there was no evidence of voter fraud that would affect the outcome of the election in different states. This is the same thing we heard about during the second hearing, a hearing completely focused on showing us that Trump lost. He knew he lost, and he lied about it to raise millions of dollars. If you want to catch up on what happened that day, watch this video right here. But let's keep going. While Jeffrey Rosen, the acting attorney general, kept debunking all the election conspiracy theories that popped up, Jeffrey Clark, the environmental guy, demanded that Rosen and his deputy, Richard Donaghue, sign that letter. On January 3rd, Jeffrey Clark went to Jeffrey Rosen and told him that Trump had offered him the job of attorney general. Now listen to Jeffrey Rosen recount that whole situation.
So, but he had acknowledged that he had had further, I don't know if it was meeting or phone calls or what, but further discussion with the president, despite having, a week earlier said that if he wouldn't do that, and if he did, if he got an invitation to do that, he would let Rich Donaghue or me know. So it was a contentious meeting where we were chastising him that he was insubordinate, he was out of line, he had not honored his own representations of what he would do. And he raised again that he thought that letter should go out, and we were not receptive to that.
Did he tell you in that the president had offered him the job of acting attorney general?
That was a day later. On the second, he said that the president had asked him to let him know if he'd be willing to take it. Subsequently, he told me that on Sunday the 3rd, he told me that the timeline had moved up and that the president had offered him the job and that he was accepting it.
Well, let's ask about that. What was your reaction to that?
Well, on the one hand, I wasn't going to accept being fired by my subordinate, so I wanted to talk to the president directly. With regard to the reason for that is I wanted to try to convince the president not to go down the wrong path that Mr. Clark seemed to be advocating. And it wasn't about me. There's only 17 days left in the administration at that point. I would have been perfectly content to have either of the gentlemen on my left or right replace me if anybody wanted to do that. But I did not want for the Department of Justice to be put in a posture where it would be doing things that were not consistent with the truth, were not consistent with its own appropriate role, or were not consistent with the Constitution.
So then Rosen asked for a meeting with Trump, Steven Engel, Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel, and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel. A very small circle of people knew what Clark and Trump's plans were at this point. But Rosen decided to contact the Assistant Attorneys General and let them know what the plan was. All of them said they would resign if Trump put Jeffrey Clark as the head of the Justice Department. Both Rosen and Donaghue also said that they would quit. Something that people didn't know until this hearing is that by 4:19 p.m. on January 3rd, 2021, Trump's White House was already referring to Jeffrey Clark as the acting attorney general.
So as part of the Select Committee's investigation, we found that while Mr. Rosen, Mr. Donaghue, and Mr. Engel were preparing for their meeting at the White House, Jeff Clark and the president were in constant communication beginning at 7 a.m. White House call logs obtained by the committee show that by 4:19 p.m. on January 3rd, the White House had already begun referring to Mr. Clark as the acting attorney general. As far as the White House was concerned, Mr. Clark was already at the top of the Justice Department.
So we kind of had a new acting attorney general at one point last year, and we would have never known this if it hadn't been for the January 6th committee's investigation? Wow. That evening, on January 3rd, they had the meeting. Who was there? Well, Trump and Jeffrey Clark, of course, plus acting attorney general Jeffrey Rosen, who requested the meeting, his deputy Richard Donaghue, Steven Engel, assistant attorney general for the Office of Legal Counsel, and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel. This meeting lasted over 2.5 hours, a meeting where Trump brought up Jeffrey Clark's plan. He asked, "What have I got to lose?" Trump backed down, possibly after they also let him know that the story about the collapse of the Department of Justice would completely overshadow any other story in the media.
The president, my recollection is that when the president turned to me and said, Steve, you wouldn't leave, would you? I said, Mr. President, I've been with you through 4 attorneys general, including 2 acting attorney general, but I couldn't be part of this. And then the other thing that I said was that, look, all anyone is going to sort of think about when they see this, no one is going to read this letter. All anyone is going to think is that you went through 2 attorneys general in 2 weeks until you found the environmental guy to sign this thing. And so the story is not going to be that the Department of Justice has found massive corruption that would have changed the result of the election. It's going to be the disaster of Jeff Clark. And I think at that point, Pat Cipollone said, yeah, this is a murder-suicide pact, this letter.
And I would note too, Congressman, that it was in this part of the conversation where Steve pointed out that Jeff Clark would be left leading a graveyard, and that comment clearly had an impact on the president. The leadership will be gone. Jeff Clark will be left leading a graveyard.
But 3 days later, during his speech at the January 6th rally, he repeated all the debunked election claims. ¿Qué cosa con este señor? After the attack on the Capitol, the Congress members who attended that meeting on December 21st asked for presidential pardons. Their names are Andy Biggs from Arizona, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Matt Gaetz from Florida, Louis Gohmert from Texas, and Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, the man who brought Jeffrey Clark to the White House on December 22nd. Outside of the hearing, we've had some developments. Federal agents searched the home of former Trump Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark. So stay tuned to see what happens on that front. My next summary will be about the surprise hearing, the testimony by White House senior aide Cassidy Hutchinson. She was assistant to former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. This was one of the biggest hearings so far because it was packed with a ton of things that we did not know. There have been a lot of January 6 hearings, and each of them is over 2 hours long. If you don't have time for that, then I've made you summaries. Check out this playlist I made for you right here. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you get notified every time I upload one of these summary videos or any other videos covering important issues about US politics. Nos vemos pronto. Un abrazo.